So, from your point of view, is there a solution to the problem of political representation?
Well, Ricardo, as you know very well, political participation is enabled by institutions, but also by technology. And one of the technologies that we have used for political participation is the number 2 graphite, pencil, and paper. And it's hard for me to imagine that in 100 years from now, political participation is going to be people going behind a little curtain and writing down with a little graphite pen on a little piece of paper what their opinion is or who they want to represent. The system that we have now is what I like to call the 1-bit democracy. Okay? What do I mean by 1-bit democracy? Is every 4 years we all get asked to provide 1 bit of information. It's a binary decision. Do you want this guy or do you want that guy? You know? And the question that I want to ask now is, well, how do we go from the 1-bit democracy to the 100-bit democracy, to the 1 kilobyte democracy, to the megabyte democracy? Well, in order to get to the megabyte democracy, you know, there's a few things that we have to do, and I think Latin America is in a good position to do them. Why do I think that Latin America is good to eventually develop these new platforms and the new forms of political participation? Because of 3 things. First, I think that online, and when I mean online, mobile, asynchronous, all of these online forms of participation are not yet well developed anywhere. So the issue is still up for grabs. And because of that, if Latin America is to succeed and become the first, we're going to be able to export those ideas. We're going to be the innovators. We're not going to be lagging. We're not going to be importing the technology, but we're going to be exporting the technology and the ideas. The second reason why I think Latin America is a good place to develop these new technologies is because actually there's relevant experience in the region. So Brazil, as many of you know, has been the leader in the idea of participatory budgeting. In Porto Alegre in 1989 was the first recognized instance of people actually voting on line items of a budget rather than on a representative. You know, Mexico more recently, they did, you know, they crowdsourced, you know, on the population a survey in which people would identify the most useless bureaucratic procedure, el trámite más inútil. Yeah? And it shows that actually, you know, you can crowdsource and you can get people to participate. And even in Chile in 2003, there was a site that was launched by the Chilean Senate that is called Senador Virtual, in which actually people can vote on bills that are currently being discussed in the Senate. Okay? So it's an issue that is up for grabs. You know, Latin America has relevant experience. And the other thing is actually, you know, there's a big level of discontent. People, as Denise was saying and as Ricardo was saying, they don't feel represented anymore. And in this case, that's an opportunity, because what this implies is that if a platform is well developed, this platform is likely going to be adopted. There's people that actually is expecting for something like that to emerge. So in order to construct this, I think there is an agenda that we need to develop, and this agenda has 3 main areas. One is a research agenda. In the research agenda, I think we need to figure out some important questions. You know, what issues people want to delegate, and what issues do people want to, you know, decide more directly. You know, we don't know which issues we should delegate or not, which issues people want to actually, you know, participate. How often people don't want to participate? Probably they don't want to participate too frequent, but also not too sparse, and we haven't figured that out yet. You know, what is the relevant geographic range of participation? You know, we don't know. Now we have like a system that kind of like some fixed geographic ranges by cities and states and you know, federal governments, but maybe, you know, there's different granularity, and that granularity is adaptive, depends on the issue, depends on how hot that issue is at the time, and we will need to develop, you know, a research agenda in which we're able to figure out the answer to those questions. The second agenda is a design agenda. Well, how are these tools going to look like? We don't know how they're going to look like, how we're going to make them engaging. And when I say how they're going to look like, I don't only mean about the graphic identity and interaction design, although I do believe that those things are extremely relevant. You know, anything that is done online, you know, or any tool per se, you know, has an important design component, but also, you know, how we're going to get the relevant information to people, how we're going to design ways for people to discuss and participate. You know? So there is an important design agenda that also includes ways of verifying the identity of individuals online. Governments are very good right now of verifying the identity of anyone of us offline. We have like an ID with a number, but online we don't have an institution of verifying ourselves online. If we're going to develop new forms of political participation, we're going to need to develop forms of online identity. The third agenda that I think we need to push on top of the research agenda and the design agenda is the political agenda. If there's going to be new tools for participation, the governments or the institutions that are engaging people through these tools are going to have to do a commitment to take the results that come out of these tools seriously and incorporate them. Because if not, actually it's not going to have any traction. So they need to commit to take action on the things that get resolved there by the citizens. They also need to provide the relevant information. Okay, so there is an agenda of actually developing transparency. So these institutions would have to, release relevant information. And finally, there's also, a media agenda. There is an engagement, a political engagement of the media, because if we're going to have online forms of participation, these are going to be on the currency of the web. And the currency of the web is traffic. Okay? And in order to drive that traffic, you're going to actually need to engage traditional media in order to cover these issues. In Chile, we have this Senador Virtual, and it has very little traffic. There's like 3,000 people that vote on each one of the issues. I have not seen it once in the Chilean news, although important issues are being discussed. The bills in the Senate about abortion, about gay rights, are being discussed, and people, you see that they discuss them in the traditional media, and they're unaware of the other tools because actually there's not an engagement that is driving that there. Finally, I want to finish with two things. The first one is the limitations. I do think that there's important limitations on thinking of this type of technology. The first limitation is that it is very easy to argue that probably this is going to exclude. Okay? Not everyone has access to the web. Not everyone has access to a mobile phone. Not everyone has access to communication technologies. I agree 100%. I agree that nowadays probably these tools would exclude some people. I agree that also probably 10 years ago they would have excluded a little bit more. Okay, or way more. But at the MIT Media Lab, we develop a lot of technologies, and we have kind of like a very simple rule to try to understand what is a good idea. A good idea is an idea that is bad now, that is good 10 years from now, and that is excellent 20 years from now. Okay? So what I would say is that if we wait for all the conditions to be there, I guarantee that we're going to be too late. Okay? You need to move before. Okay? We're doing innovation. Innovation is done when the market is not yet ready. You have to, be a few steps ahead. The other problem is that there could be capture, of certain areas by certain groups that start participating more heavily, and obviously all of the design decisions would have to try to incorporate, ways of preventing this from happening. But I think if we're able to succeed in this agenda, maybe not in 100 years, hopefully in 10 or 20, there's going to be a few forms of participation that we're going to start discovering. There's going to be great things that we're going to improve upon. First, I think we can have a little bit more of engagement. Second, I think that actually people is going to have an incentive to be more informed. But what I think actually is the most relevant aspect is that people tend to own the decisions that they make, not the decisions that are made by the people that they choose. Okay? So because of that, actually, by developing these new forms or these new forms of participation, these new technologies for participation, people is going to be making the decisions directly, and when those decisions have consequences, they're going to have to own the consequences of those decisions. So hopefully this is going to help us move into a system in which political action and political participation is not a synonym of petitions. Because now you're going to be asking yourself, and if you're going to have to make the decision, you're going to have to own the responsibility, and ultimately I think that could lead to an engagement and to actions that are more proactive and more creative.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.